Data science. I grew up with Yu-Gi-Oh! Both the game and the series. I was inspired by the power to summon monsters, collect crazy cards, and scheme up strategies for victory. The allure to become the king of games! Yu-Gi-Oh! Over the decades has amassed over 11,000 cards in the TCG, and even over 12,000 cards in the OCG as at 2022, and spawned new playstyles and archetypes along the way. One of the key card types in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is monster cards. These cards do battle for you, and are often what define an archetype. You'll see why I bring up archetypes later in the video. These monster cards have a combination of attribute and type. In today's video, we'll find the loneliest monsters as defined by the combination pairs of the two traits and the cards that are currently released in the TCG. I'd like to thank Yu-Gi-Oh! Pro Deck. For your Yu-Gi-Oh! Data needs, visit Yu-Gi-Oh! Pro Deck. Link in the description. The gameplay of Yu-Gi-Oh! Has been heavily influenced by the GX era, which gave rise to archetypes. Prior to that, I would think that the Yu-Gi-Oh! Community would agree that Yu-Gi-Oh! Was a bit of a lawless place before we actually had rules.
They are underwater.
But his target isn't your sea monsters. I'm having him attack the moon!
No!
Since GX, archetypes have largely dominated the meta. These are sets of cards that generally fit within a theme, and often that theme is reflected in their monster cards by a type and attribute. For example, Dragon Maids are all dragons. Of the types we currently have, we have Aqua, Beast, Beast Warrior, Creator God, Cyburst, Dinosaur, Divine Beast, Dragon, Fairy, Fiend, Fish, Insect, Machine, Plant, Psychic, Pyro, Reptile, Rock, Sea Serpent, Spellcaster, Thunder, Warrior, Winged Beast, Worm, and Zombie. As for attributes, we have Dark, Divine, Earth, Fire, Light, Water, and Wind. But for the sake of this video, we'll skip the unofficial Laugh attribute. Want to know how many combinations of the two there are? Well, we get 161 possible combinations. Except not all combinations actually have a combo in the TCG. So for the sake of determining the rarest combo, these would be eliminated immediately, because we're only interested in cards that exist. That doesn't mean that one day Konami might decide to plug up these combinations. But Wilpo, how did you know that those combinations didn't exist? I'm glad you asked. This is, after all, a tech channel. So in addition to finding the rarest combinations, I also found combinations that are yet to exist, which are Fire Fish and Water Pyro. That is, if we exclude the Divine Attribute and Creator God and Divine Beast types. First, I connected to Yu-Gi-Oh! Pro's API endpoint and queried its monster data. This returns a JSON of all sorts of neat things, like the cards ID, name, type, attribute, attack and defense stats, flavor text, and even the going price on sites like Amazon and eBay. I then converted that into tabular data so I can run logic over it. Two of the more established ways you can do this in data science is through SQL or Python. For this example, I'm going to use Python, but the equivalent in SQL will look something like this. The high-level idea is to create a summary of this data by count, because we want to know which combinations are the rarest. The main two steps in this would be a group by and a sort by. Now we have our dataset to analyze. In addition to finding the combinations that don't exist and have the rarest combos, our dataset can also be used to find the most common combinations, which some of you may have already guessed is Dark Fiends. Additionally, we can break down the data by type and attribute distribution. Now for the moment you've all been waiting for. It's time to go through the rarest combinations of type and attribute. Again, as a disclaimer, this is just going off the cards that are currently available at the time of making this video. Our threshold for shortlisting these cards is going to be on the original Egyptian god cards, which most Yu-Gi-Oh! Fans will know that these cards have a very limited gene pool. So, starting off with the Divine Beasts, which there are only 5 of. This is mostly thanks to the Winged Dragon of Ra, which has an additional 2 forms, which add 2 to the original trinity of the original god cards. This being Sofa the Sky Dragon, the Winged Dragon of Ra, and Obelisk, the Tormentor. But in the same rank of only having 5 cards in their combinations, we have Light Dinosaur, Galaxy Tyranno, Superconductor Tyranno, and Ultimate Conductor Tyranno, which are all from the Tyranno archetype, which is a dinosaur type archetype of varying attributes. but classically they were Earth attribute. However, the archetype was expanded with the Conductor Tyranno playstyle. Additionally, Galaxy Tyranno is actually also part of the Galaxy archetype, which is all light attribute monsters of varying types. REX, this little guy is kind of on his own, and the same with Animadorn, Ankylosaur, Archosaur, which both don't have their own archetype. Fire Rock. Totem 5 doesn't belong to an archetype. Kayan, the Master Magma Blacksmith, is part of the Laval archetype, which is an archetype consisting of fire attribute monsters of varying types. It just so happens that this is the rock combination from that family. El Shadal Grista is part of the Shadal archetype, which is an archetype where they took another Yu-Gi-Oh monster and turned it into a dark attribute puppet version of itself. Grista being the Shadal form of Gem Knight Crystal, Adamancipator Crystal Leonite, and Adamancipator Risen Leonite, which is an archetype based on 3 adventurers who find rocks and then they hatch into big living rocks, each one aligned to its own attribute, hence making these rare combinations. Dark Aqua. Skull Kraken and Mucus Shield are both without their own larger archetype. Evil Swarm Ketos is part of the L Swarm archetype, and more specifically the Evil Swarm archetype, which consists of dark attribute and varying types. They will also reappear further down in this list. Danger! Nessie is part of the Danger archetype. The Danger archetype is based on cryptids of dark attribute and places a unique type for each one of its monsters. They will also reappear further down this list. Chalislime. Incantation Chalislime is part of the Incantation archetype. It is the archetype if Beauty and the Beast was told through Konami's eyes, and it consists of light and dark attribute monsters. The typing is more attributed to what the objects actually are, but its attributes are only light and dark, which makes it more justified to have a dark aqua monster over a water aqua monster. Up next, we have monsters that only have 4 cards in the combination sets. They are Light Pyro. Another incantation, we have Incantation Candle, which is a light pyro, where we'd normally expect pyro to be fire attribute. However, again, thanks to Incantation only having light and dark attribute, we have an excuse for this combination. Next we have the Helios archetype, which create the following 3 monsters that build up the roster of light attribute pyro monsters. That being Helios, the Primordial Sun, Helios Duo Magistus, and Helios Trice Magistus. Wind Zombies, Tengu, the Winged Mayakashi, and Hajun, the Winged Mayakashi, are both part of the Mayakashi archetype, which is all zombies of varying attributes. Supersonic Skullflame is part of the Skullflame archetype, which is all zombies, but for some reason, making sense was too confusing for this monster. So despite all the other cards in this archetype being fire attribute, and also having the word flame in its name, this guy just had to be different and switched to being a wind attribute. Ghost Mourner and Moonlit Chill is part of the Yokai Girl archetype, which consists of all zombies, each with a different attribute. Wind Sea Serpent. Ukiyo Punk Amazing Dragon is part of the Punk archetype. The Punk archetype is based on rock and roll and music, but in my opinion it also includes bits of neo-style street art, which has a mix of types and attributes. Spearfish Soldier, Sky Starray, and Air Orca are all on their own without a supporting archetype. Light Aquas, Servant of Catabolism, and Unformed Void are without larger archetypes. Live Twin Kisakil Frost is part of the Live Twin archetype, or the larger Twin archetype, which kind of is mostly Cyberse type monsters, but Frost decided to be special and became a light aqua monster instead. Lady of the Lake is a support card for the Noble Knights archetype. Noble Knights is an archetype based on Arthurian lore. Most of the archetype is very warrior focused, with some variation in its attributes. However, when you dip out of the warriors, then you have some interesting combinations of types. For instance, we have Merlin, the dark attribute spellcaster, and I guess we have Lady of the Lake being the light aqua. Water Thunder, Lightning Conjure and Bolt Escargot. Lightning Conjure and Bolt Escargot are both vanilla solo monsters. However, Bolt Penguin is actually part of the sneaky larger archetype of the Penguin archetype, which didn't really have its own support until Kingdom came out. Wind Reptiles. Old Entity Hastor is part of the Entity archetype, which is based on Lovecraftian lore, all of differing attribute and type. Destruction Cyclone isn't exactly part of an archetype, but it is part of a set of 6 reptiles that nuke the field. Alien Skull is part of the Alien archetype, which is a reptile type archetype of varying attributes. But even so, it's the only wind reptile in the entire archetype. Gladiator Beast Secutor is part of the Gladiator Beast archetype, which is full of animalistic types like Beast, Beast Warrior, Winged Beast, Fish. However, in this case, it's a wind reptile. For monsters that only have 3 cards in its population for its combination type, we have Dark Sea Serpent. Gladiator Beast Domitianus is part of the Gladiator's Beast archetype. And we would have expected a water type Sea Serpent generally, since most Sea Serpents are water attribute. Chaos Daedalus, which is a dark attribute reskin of the original Daedalus, while still keeping its original typing. Another one from the Danger archetype, we have Danger Ogopogo, which lives into the dark attribute that the archetype is known for, and fulfilling its unique role as the Sea Serpent. An even rarer combination within the Adamancipator archetype. We have Adamancipator Crystal Dragite and Adamancipator Risen Dragite, which are both water rocks. Finally, we have number 30, Acid Golem of Destruction, which isn't exactly in its own archetype, but you could say it's part of the Xyz numbers archetype. Spiritual Beast Apelio and Ritual Beast Ulti Apelio, which come from the Ritual Beast archetype, which is based on an archetype where a tamer meets a beast, and they fuse to create a combined version of themselves from the extra deck. Rare combo, but now we do have a Wind Pyro. However, Pyro aristotically lends itself to the fire attribute. Gusto Phoenix is part of the Gusto archetype. The Gusto archetype is comprised of wind attribute monsters, which are generally psychic or winged beast. In fact, it's kinda odd that it decided to be a Pyro when it could have just as well been another Gusto winged beast monster. Water Insect. Performer Pal Skeeter Skimmer is part of the Performer Pal archetype, which is all carnival animals and performers, which really has no set attribute or type. To be honest, I was kind of expecting more water insects. Numbing Grub in the Ice Barrier is part of the Ice Barrier archetype, which is characterized by all water attribute monsters of varying types. This grub just happens to fill the insect slot. Bee Trooper Light Flapper is from the Bee Trooper archetype, which consists of all insect types of varying attributes. And Flapper just happens to fill the water slot. Monsters that only have one other than itself in its combinations are Dark Fish. Earthbound Immortal Kaku Koala is part of the Earthbound archetype, which is based on the Nazca lines, and they are all dark attribute monsters of varying types. Koala just happens to fill in the fish slot. Shark Fortress belongs to the Shark archetype, which consists of fish-type monsters of varying attributes. Generally you expect fish to be in the water attribute, but I guess this guy's the exception. Earthfish Scrap Shark is part of the Shark archetype, sure, but really it belongs to the Scrap archetype, which is all Earth attribute monsters of varying types. Soul Eater is a standalone vanilla. Light Sea Serpent. Similar to Chaos Daedalus, Light Ray Daedalus is part of the Light Ray archetype, which reskins monsters to become light attribute and keeping the original typing. Kaiser Seahorse is an iconic monster from early Yu-Gi-Oh! It was known for its high attack as a simple 4-star monster. Both our entries for Dark Pyro are from Evil Swarm, that being Evil Swarm O-Lantern and Evil Swarm Obliviwisp. Windfish, both standalone without an archetype. They are Fly Fang and Flying Fish. Finally, the most anticipated set of cards, the ones that only have themselves. Several of you probably already predicted Palacti, the creator of light, which is the only divine creator god monster in the game. But this card actually shares its spot in a 5-way tie. The other lonely cards being Light Fish, another Flying Fish, Golden Flying Fish. This guy is all on its own without a larger archetype, and is the only light attribute fish. Fire Thunder, Magic Key Fiend, Transferal Mine, is part of the Magic Key archetype, which is inspired by the Lesser Key of Solomon demonology, which doesn't have much of a type or attribute theme. Earth Sea Serpent, Subterra Behemoth, Stygo Kraken, is part of the Subterra archetype, so their playstyle is based on them being set face down on the field, and also being an Earth attribute archetype. And finally, Fire Sea Serpent. This is the only card in this list that made itself into the banned list, because it's essentially an easy to bring out Foolish Burial, which is a card that is currently limit 1, and also a Foolish Burial Goods rolled into 1, which in the current meta is too fast, because not only can it search, load your graveyard, and even trigger graveyard effects, And this card being Lavavel Chain, being the only Fire Sea Serpent. And for the population with no current residents, don't know if anyone in Konami is currently watching, but I like to propose a challenge to create Fire Fish archetype. Like, wouldn't it be kind of funny if there was an archetype based on sushi? You would have the fish part, and adding wasabi would add in some heat, or maybe grilled fish to turn it into a fire attribute? Oh. Wasted opportunity, Konami.